Good af Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Monday, happy President's Day. Thanks for those of you who are joining us on a day off or a quiet day at home. I forgot that today was President's Day, and when I drove into College Park from my home in Annapolis, I was like, "Where is everybody? There's no traffic this morning on 495. This was great." So, hope you guys are all having a wonderful day. We're gonna let some folks in. We've got some folks trickling into the waiting room, but thank you guys so much for joining us for today's session, our Terrapins Connect live virtual networking experience for Terps impacted by changes happening within the federal government. So we know that plenty of you here have been impacted by what's been going on with the federal government level over the past year, and we wanted to make sure that you had a space to connect and chat with fellow Terps who are experiencing the same thing, going through the same thing, that might have questions about what's happening. So we are happy to sort of help have this space here for you to join us. This is going to be an interactive session, just to give you that heads up. We want you to make sure that you've got the chance to connect and talk and chat with fellow Terps. So myself and my good friend Meghan Gilkes is here. We're going to have a moderated conversation to get things kicked off and started at first. And then we're going to pop you guys into breakout rooms, small groups where you can connect and chat with one another, ask some questions. We'll have some conversation prompts ready for you to go. But we, again, want to make sure that you've got the space to connect with some fellow Terps, ask questions, find the folks who might be experiencing or going through the same things as you, and make some connections and some network. So, for those of you who are just joining us, feel free to drop in the chat your name, your graduation year, where you're joining us from today. We'll get things started here in just a minute. We have a few more folks joining us in the waiting room. But again, thank you guys so much for joining us today. We're excited to have the conversation started. And hope you guys have all had a good weekend. I know for those of us, I again live right here around College Park in the DMV area, and I'm just happy that it was above freezing this weekend, and I was actually able to go outside and get some yard work done and clear away some snow for my dog to finally have some more yard space to run around in. So, for those of you who are also in the DMV area, I hope you guys are enjoying what's probably fall spring, but my fingers are crossed. I'm hopeful that we'll have some spring weather on its way soon. All right, well, I see people. Jennifer, hello. Allison, good to see you. Hi, Layla. Thanks for joining us. Some local folks, which is great. Again, if you're just now joining us, thanks so much for joining us today for this Terrapins Connect virtual conversation. Again, it's going to be an interactive session. That'll come in a little bit, but we're going to go ahead and kick things off. So we'll do an introduction of our esteemed alum, Meghan Gilkes, who's here joining us today to share a little bit about her professional experience working in the federal government and then pivoting and making a transition to the private sector, which is sort of the topic du jour of where we are in the world today. And then after that conversation, we'll do some small group networking. Again, the chance for you and fellow Terps to connect and chat with one another in breakout rooms, just to, learn a little bit more about each other, ask some questions, and make some connections with fellow Terps. We'll do some reflections and takeaway time, and then we'll wrap up with just some additional info from the Alumni Association, resources that are there to support you in your career journey and upcoming events and things that we have. But I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Meghan. Meghan, if you want to hop off and just tell us a little bit about yourself, your time at Maryland, your major, your experience, and sort of professionally your journey, what you've gone through, we'll kick off the conversation from there.
Sure thing. Hi, everyone. So excited to be here. Thank you to Antoine for the invite, and just looking forward to an exciting interactive session with everybody here. So, a little bit about me, Megan Jokes, class of 2016. So, I'm hitting that 10-year out of college anniversary this year, which is absolutely wild. But as you can see on here, I was a history and government and politics double degree while I was at Maryland. I have certainly used my government and politics degree to the highest extent since graduating. So, graduating in 2016, I did get my professional start with some time on the 2016 campaigns. Since then, I have basically done every facet of government and politics, both from campaigns to nonprofits to public affairs. Most notably, I did spend almost 8 years on Capitol Hill, working in the Senate. And then I left January of 2025 at the end of the 118th Congress, and I am now in corporate government relations at Kimberly-Clark. I work directly under the vice president for global government relations as her chief of staff. So been a little bit all over the government sector, but definitely most time spent on Capitol Hill. And I'm excited to talk about the transition from that public work to that private work because sometimes it can seem a bit scary, especially when it feels a bit forced upon us, when we might not have been anticipating that move at the time that we had to make it.
Awesome. Thank you, Megan. And you teed us off for a great spot to start at that forced move. So talk to me a little bit more about, where you were in your headspace, working on the Hill and thinking, I don't know, maybe it's time to pivot and make a shift and leave the federal government. I know that was a choice that you were able to make yourself, but talk us through a little bit about what that looked like for you and what helped you consider sort of making that jump.
Yeah, sure. So, yeah, I am very lucky. I made the choice to leave, though it may have been the timeline may have been a little bit different than I anticipated just with the way elections turn out and that sort of thing. So I came to the Hill in 2017, almost a year after the elections, after bopping around for, the other kind of different places. And in 2017, I started as the deputy scheduler for Senator Patty Murray of Washington State. If anyone's a bit of a nerd like I am, she's the teeny tiny senator with the blonde bob. And she hit all of 5 feet tall on a good day. No, I'm from New Jersey and went to University of Maryland, had no connections to Washington State, but did have a background in scheduling on the campaigns that I had worked on. So it was a good fit in that way. Flash forward a couple years, 2020, the longtime scheduler was leaving, and I got promoted to director of scheduling about 2 weeks before COVID hit. So that was another unique piece that I got to do there. This woman who'd been in office actually longer than I'd been alive, which she didn't like me to remind her. She was elected the year before I was born. Um, and now I have to redo all these processes and teach a almost 70-year-old woman how to, do things virtually during COVID. So that was its own experience. Then she was reelected in 2022, which was awesome to get to go work on her campaign out in Seattle. And with that, she was now the president pro tem, which is the highest ranking member of the majority party in the Senate. It's a highly ceremonial position. Most recently, it's been held by Senator Murray, Senator Grassley of Iowa, Senator Leahy of Vermont, Senator Inouye of Hawaii. It's a ceremonial position, but it does come with really cool, unique responsibilities. She signed all of the bills, and she was in line for the presidency with that came an entire security detail and just a whole new world for us. And so in 2023, at the beginning of the 118th Congress, I moved up and I was her director of operations for the leadership office. And I was a team of one, which was awesome. It definitely spoke to my scheduling and operations experience in the personal office, and I was still highly integrated with the scheduling team there. An amazing 2 years experience, getting to do all of those really cool, unique things that came with that. But then at the end of the 118th Congress, during that summer of like 2024, I had definitely been thinking like, okay, there's a really good chance that the Democrats lose the Senate. So what does that mean for me? Because she will no longer be president pro tem. There is no minority version of this office. So I'd been thinking about leaving the office. I had been thinking about moving over to potentially be a chief of staff in another office or maybe even a leadership office on the House side, that sort of thing. I really hadn't been considering moving to the private sector, if we're being honest. And then in October of 2024, my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. We are all good now. She's officially a cancer survivor, which is great. But between that and then the following month, when Vice President Harris lost the election, that just changed a lot of opportunities that would have been ahead of me. And I was very lucky that being the only staffer in that leadership office, I actually qualified for the Senate version of severance. So I was going to have 2 months of full pay between January and March of 2025 to really figure out what I wanted to do. And just given my personal family things going on and my, kind of professional, I'd kind of hit my ceiling in my current office, and it felt like a lot of the opportunities I'd been discussing no longer existed with both the Democrats losing the Senate and the White House. So I said, you know what? Time to take a break. Work has been my life for the past 8 years, and I think I just need to, you know, sit back and reevaluate what I want to do. So that was really nice that I had that time to do that. And during that time, I did a lot of networking, talked to a lot of people about, I was in a unique experience. Scheduling and operations is not a traditional career path in politics. And like, how would I translate outside of it? Applied to a bunch of these chief of staff type positions. And eventually I landed with the Kimberly-Clark Corporation. So I've been there just about a year in March, the chief of staff to the vice president of global government relations, as I said. And I do a lot of the type of work that I did on the Hill. I run the DC office, I oversee the budget, and I also help our vice president just coordinate her life and her calendar and her schedule. I also, in that time, founded Hire Her Career Consulting, which is a career consulting firm focused on women in politics because government politics is just a very real weird world I discovered through my own experiences. And then as I kind of progressed during my time on the Hill, it just can be a little bit of a mystery for folks. And I thought, what would be a great way to use my skill set from the Hill than to help other young women and basically be who I wish I had had as I was graduating and entering the workforce. So that is what I do now. I am here in DC. I live here with my husband and our small zoo of rescue animals. And I just let Antoine know I am also expecting my first baby in July. So, sometimes when you leave the public sector and you're a little more relaxed, you might have more opportunities in life. So, that's kind of me and how I got here, and my kind of interesting journey.
That's awesome. And again, congratulations. We're always excited for what we hope is a future Terp in the
We're trying.
making coming down the pike. So very excited for that. I want to sort of tuck back to, you talked about what that transition looked like and what it meant for you, leaving Senator Murray's office and jumping into sort of the private sector space. And, as something as sort of, I guess, even though, yes, where your position on the Hill had a lot of very cyclical and due to election cycles, lots of those things, those play an impact for other folks working in government. It's very stable and secure, nonpartisan. You go with the flow no matter what administration's in office. But there is a lot of anxiety and sort of big questions you have to ask when you're making that jump. So, did you have any sort of fears or assumptions about pivoting to working in the private sector? And what ultimately sort of helped you feel confident to make that leap, to make the jump to leave the federal government?
Sure, absolutely. I did have some concerns as I was leaving. As I mentioned, I wasn't expecting to go private so quickly. Everyone jokes that eventually you leave the Hill and like sell out and go private, but I hadn't been planning to do that. So I was twofold concerned. On one hand, I was like, how do I market my skill set to the private sector? I'm not a policy person. I'm not a communications person. I'm operations. And will that be valued and respected in the same way that it is on Capitol Hill and within many factors of the government? So that was one concern that I had. And then the other hand, leaving, I was in partisan politics. And so I was very concerned about leaving and going somewhere that you don't walk in the door knowing that your values align with your coworkers. That was always something really nice that I had while working in, in the government for the Senate. It's like you walk in knowing you all work for the same person, and therefore generally you kind of can feel safe assuming that you land in the same places. So those two things were kind of my big issue. I was very lucky. I found in talking to a lot of people that actually this was a skill set that was really needed. And at first, I'd been applying to a lot of like, government relations director or government relations manager, and I wasn't getting those jobs. And I was a little surprised because I was like, been on the Hill for a long time. I have a pretty good network, and I was surprised. Well, come to find out as I'm talking to people, they were like, well, Megan, you are a Democrat. You come from a Democratic background in a city that is now run by Republicans. And these companies and these corporations are looking for, and it would be the same for the opposite, right? If I'd been a Republican leaving the Hill during a Democratic administration, I'd have the same issue that basically they're looking for folks with those connections and with those experiences there. However, the chief of staff positions, the operations director positions, those sort of things are nonpartisan for the most part, off Hill especially. And so I was lucky enough that I found that those people needed my skills more than my connections and experience. And the connection and experience were actually just like a plus as I was talking to a lot of them, as I do a lot of coordination with it in the Hill. As far as the values piece, that was definitely something that I was concerned about as I left. I landed at Kimberly-Clark Corporation, which is, you'll know us as Kleenex, Kotex, Huggies, a ton of other things. We're actually just got approved. We're acquiring Tylenol and Neutrogena, and so basically, your medicine cabinet is probably Kimberly-Clark. But what's awesome is that they have such a focus on families and kids, and that is something that means a lot to me. I think that really translated from my experience with Senator Murray, which was her focus. And so while, maybe I don't walk into a room knowing that I'm working with people who necessarily vote the way that I do, let's say, it was still nice knowing we all came in with like the same goals of like having the safest diapers and the safest tampons and wanting the best for like families, not even just in the US anymore, but now across the world, which was a really nice kind of balance that I found.
That's awesome. And we hinted on it a little bit, but I even want to, talk about a little bit. You talk about the skills and the values, the pieces that you were able to find. Ultimately, then that's important whenever you're looking for work. Typically, you want to have something that's going to match your personal values or match obviously the skill set that you're bringing to the table. Were there any sort of, skills from your time on the Hill when you ended up going to work at Kimberly-Clark that you were surprised that actually translated really well into moving into the private sector?
Yes, and I think this would go for anybody leaving any department or agency. A lot of people have no idea how these places work. That if they have been private, their whole lives, or, you're the GR team, but you're maybe working with the bigger company, people in the company. And so just the fact that you've like been in those rooms and at those decision-making tables, whether you were the person making the decision or you were the person bringing, let's say, the white paper or the policy proposal or whatever it might be, it's it was really I don't want to say shocking, but like, oh wow, like that's so unique. And so that is where that really comes in and people really value that across spaces because I came in March of 2025 and that was like the height of all of like the tariff fund and all of that. And while my expertise is not policy and especially not international trade policy by any means, just the fact that I had a background in what it was like to work on deals. Having watched my boss and my colleagues go through that, that was helpful. And I often knew more than a lot of people in higher up positions within the corporate space. So I think whatever your like kind of world has been in the government world, whether it be comms, policy, operations, etc., like that is all so unique that it makes you valuable, whatever organization you might be at next.
That's that exactly. And that was going to be my next question. I think you kind of answered it was like, what was the most surprising thing that folks at Kimberly-Clark found out about you in terms of like skills and things that you were bringing to the table? It certainly sounds like being, the back pocket. Hey, Megan can answer all these really intricate questions about like how things move through the Hill, like how the bill process works, what that's like. So, are there any other things that they were like, oh wow, that's actually great that you can bring that to the table too?
Yeah, I think that piece was huge, right? Like, okay, that's awesome that you got from ChatGPT that that's how a bill becomes a law, but let me tell you, like the 800 other steps that have to happen in between that you don't even know about. That, and then also, I think especially in like the kind of scheduling operations world, but if you've ever presented a policy proposal or a white paper to like your boss or the secretary you worked for or the agency head you worked for, the proximity to those people in the government is it's so much easier to talk to the higher ups, right? Like I was at 24 when I started, like talking to the woman who was like the third, highest person in the Democratic Party. And I think that translates into my ease and comfortability of talking to like the C-suite folks. They come to visit all the time. And like, it was funny at first, my boss was kind of like, my new boss was kind of like, oh, the general counsel's coming or like the vice president for litigation. And I'm like, okay, ma'am, like I've gotten on the phone with the president of the United States. Like, I promise I can handle these folks. So yeah, I just think the uniqueness of this work will make you valuable in any kind of setting that you move on to next.
Yeah, and that, I'm just taking a look at, what we're seeing in the chat too. And Karen mentioned, that there's a lot of skills and things that you're bringing to private sector work, but there's stability, and that's a question that a lot of folks are asking when thinking about making this transition and this jump. So, bringing all those skills that you have that you've acquired for some folks, decades worth of experience in the federal government. And not that you have decades of experience, you've got a depth of experience, which is fantastic. But like, what does what would you say from your shoes to somebody who's questioning what that long-term stability looks like from making this jump? What advice would you give to somebody who feels uncertain about that?
Sure. I think, first of all, totally fair, totally normal. I felt the exact same way. I think that the hardest part of the transition and like coming from what you feel might have been stable, or at least like stable for you, even though, if you're on an election cycle, nothing is stable. But I think the hardest part is just like it's like your identity for so long. I think the Hill especially, but really all of DC and a lot of government jobs, it's like I am the person who works here and does this for the good of whatever agency, department, secretary, senator I'm working for. And I think it feels hard to lose that. On the other hand, something that I've come and I say to myself all the time is like, this is the first time where like my job is like just my job. And I like it. And I like that I still feel I'm doing good work, but I don't feel beholden to it in the same way. Because like when it comes down to it, like, this is like a $72 billion company. Like my little piece is not the same that it used to be in the federal government. And while that sometimes like at first you're like a little sad about it, it actually is like a nice feeling. And that being said, like if it's not your perfect fit, like there will be something else out there and like you can move around a lot. Like people move around a lot more, I have found in the corporate space than they would have, maybe in kind of similar positions in the federal space. And so that has been really nice. Just finding out, I'm just not my job.
Yeah. And I like that last point that you mentioned about, the moving around aspect, that's something that's, kind of foreign in the federal space. When you come into the private sector, that's something that happens a lot more. For the Terps who are here with us now, who are, either in the midst of that pivot or are starting to consider that pivot or have been forced into that pivot, not by their own choice. What are some practical tips and pieces of advice that you would give, to somebody who is right there thinking about that pivot or in the midst of it, simple things that they can do or think about to help navigate it?
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. And, I'll be excited to hear from you all a little bit and kind of all your journeys and where you're at. I think there's all different versions of this happening right now. I think there's like the somewhere in between folks like me where it's like I wasn't forced out, but it made the most sense for me to move. Then there's folks like actually my best friend from college. So my best friend now was doged last year. And so she was forced out and had to make the move. And then I just think there's folks who are sitting here being like, I've been here for 25 years. This is not the job I came into, and this is not what I want to be doing right now. And you then have a little bit more time to be thinking about things. So I think overall, for all three of those people, while those are three different lanes for you to kind of think about, the first thing you need to be doing, and like always, is just, and maybe it's because I also do career consulting, but like networking, 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 and not just networking when you need something. Like if you think you might want to leave, be networking. If you don't even know if you're thinking about leaving, be networking so that when you do want to leave, you can go to those people and it doesn't feel like you're just asking for something. It's actually more like we have this relationship and now I don't feel bad asking you for something. And the networking piece, you might not even know what's out there that's applicable to what you want to do. I frankly did not know that private chief of staff jobs were actually my skill set until I met with an old colleague of mine who had left years ago, is now at a big lobbying firm, and she was like, oh no, Megan, you'd be a perfect chief of staff in the private sector. Like those are the jobs you should be targeting. And guess what? Those were all the interviews that I was getting after that, right? I'd been looking at jobs that I wasn't getting, and it turned out it's because that wasn't the right fit, even though I thought it would be. So talking to people who are in those worlds and know things a little bit better, I think that's the best way to do it is so one, network. Two, even if you're like not sure, like get your materials up to date, like work on your resume, even your cover letter, because that might also help you figure out what you want to look for. And as you're talking to people, it's like, oh, here's my skills, separating them from my title. I had actually been looking, there was a small period of time where we were considering leaving DC altogether when I was looking for a new job. And I was talking to people in New York. They read my resume and they went, a president pro what? Like it was just, and I was like, okay. And that's when I created my first skills-based resume. And, when I talk about scheduling and principal management, and then that was easier to translate. So also a good way to think about it is like, okay, great, I'm a climate policy analyst, but if I'm not looking in that space anymore, what are the skills I can bring somewhere else? And then lastly, if like you do have time, if you're choosing to leave, just taking that time and be looking for things. And that way you hopefully can have time to find the things you like, apply to them without feeling the urgency of having like quit your job or been kicked out of your job, like some of us. So those are, I think, the kind of three like tactical things I would say, like network, get your materials together, and if you can take your time, that's the best way to do it. So you don't end up in another job that you don't love.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And don't worry, we'll be coming back and talking about networking towards the end because there's a big event coming up next week that we'd love for all of you Terps to join us for. But before we pivot to the small breakout room conversations, I just want to ask Megan, if you're putting yourself back in those shoes and looking back at your time working in the federal government and then making that pivot, is there anything that you wish you would have known before making that switch? Is there anything you wish you would have done different and or would you potentially go back?
So my running bit the whole time as I was leaving was like, the hill is always going to be there, and if it's not, then we have bigger problems. So like that was kind of my theory, is like, people say the revolving door in like a bad way, but like it does exist for that reason, so that like you can do some of your public work, then go do a little private work, learn a little bit more, and then come back and be like an even better public sector employee eventually. So it's definitely not out of the cards that I would ever go back. Right now I'm really loving um my career consulting business is like really where I like, because as I was saying, like, oh, my job is just my job. So where I feel and find my like value and worth right now is in the work I'm doing to help other women get in there. I also kind of like slid into some like the content creation world, which has been kind of fun, which I can't do if I work for the federal government. So there are give and takes there. But it will always be there. And if it's not, we have bigger issues. But as far as what I wish I had known, I do wish I had just known what was out there before I was in that, because it was kind of like January 3rd, 2025 hit, and like my clock was on. I was not going to be paid anymore after March 3rd, 2025. So I knew I was on a time scale there. And so I wish I had been able to been applying or like looking a little bit more, because I didn't even know what I was looking at for the first like couple weeks. So that would have been nice. So that's kind of what I'm saying. If you're thinking of transitioning, but you're in a position that like I don't need to leave right this second, now's the time to be like looking and finding things out. Because like I found out in another place, if I hadn't gone to Kimberly Clark, a place I was looking was like foundations, which I just had no idea had such a big kind of like government component to them. And I think that would have been a cool area to explore if I'd had like a little bit more time. So yeah, it wasn't too, yeah, I think just like figuring out what's out there before the time was on, before I wasn't getting paid anymore.
Yeah, having that final end date, that clock ticking for you, I'm sure would be a little bit more of a drive to be like, okay, we've got to figure this out. So
Exactly.
so absolutely. But I do like, I really, that piece of taking the time to explore what's out there, and also like we were talking about just a little bit ago, like doing some of that legwork to sort of think ahead of like maybe I'll just like practice, pull out a skills-based resume and see what skills actually are of high value to me that are translatable, or to help you sort of do that guesswork of figuring out, where do I want to go next from here? And sometimes talking with fellow people, sometimes you're living in your own head. You've got a lot of stress and pressure on you. And so it can be hard to help navigate and figure out what comes next or how to do it, which is a good segue to our next part of the conversation. So, this is again, we're going to have a slight interactive portion to this. I would, definitely want you all to have the opportunity just to chat and connect with one another. So there's some conversation starters here. There's some questions that while you're in these small breakout rooms to think about to help you all get started with your own individual conversations. We'll do groups, small groups of just a few folks in the room. So then that way you get a chance to really have a good conversation and connect. But definitely share your name and your graduation year, your major while you were here at UND, what role you've done within the government, skills that you use regularly that you think would be beneficial in the private sector, if there's problems you're good at solving or a problem that you're trying to solve right now, and where kind of you want to go from where you're sitting at right now. If you kind of have that thought of direction and want to bounce some ideas off of each other, this is the space to do it. Or if you're not sure, again, the power of your network and the Terp network and networking with one another is the key here to help you find some success moving forward, whatever direction you're going in. So, with that being said, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. This is the part, you guys, where Antoine freaks out and isn't sure how to do breakout.